Good afternoon, good morning, and welcome to today's webinar, Collaboration as the Cornerstone of Due Diligence, What Role for Industry and Multi-Stakeholder Initiatives. My name is Valentina Bolognesi. I'm Advocacy and Engagement Advisor at amfori, and it is really my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar, which is jointly organized by amfori and the Partnership for Sustainable Textiles, also with the support of the German Helpdesk on Business and Human Rights. If we could move to the next slide, please. Just a reminder that today's webinar comes actually as part of a series of webinars on due diligence laws and practice. The slide is not yet moving. We're gonna give it a try. Thank you very much. Part of a series of webinars on due diligence laws in practice, where we unpack aspect of emerging due diligence laws. We try to understand what they mean for businesses, but we always also try to offer some practical insights into the way companies can do things in practice. We're going to continue unpacking aspects of emerging laws, and therefore do keep an eye out for the work that we do in case you wanted to know more. Taking a look at today's agenda, if we could move to the next one, please. Or maybe the housekeeping rules first. You are all muted, and this is to ensure a smooth running of the webinar. Nevertheless, we do encourage you to engage with us through the Q&A functionality. Do post your questions there throughout the whole duration of the webinar. We're going to do our utmost to get to the questions, but we oftentimes realize actually that we might not be able to do so. So we do apologize already in advance. The webinar is being recorded, and the recording alongside the slides will be shared after the webinar. We're also going to share a satisfaction survey after the webinar for you to tell us what you thought and whether we can improve going forward. Moving on to the next slide, please, and look at the agenda for today. After some very brief introductory remarks, so we're going to hand over to Andrea from the OECD. She will help us set the scene as to the role of sustainability initiatives in due diligence, their strengths and limitations. Sustainability initiatives is actually a term that the OECD utilizes to refer to industry and multi-stakeholder initiatives. So very much looking forward to hearing what it is that the OECD has observed over the years. And then we're going to move into the mandatory side of things, if I could say so, with Michaela from the German Helpdesk on Business and Human Rights. And she will help us understand what the EU Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive stipulates when it comes to collaboration and the role of initiatives. CSDDD might make you think immediately of omnibus, so we're going to say a few words about this, but this will not be the focus of today's webinar. And then we're going to have a section which is dedicated to reflections from practitioners. I'm extremely happy actually to have such a wide diversity of experts with us today, who will come from different perspectives, different supply chains, also working in different sectors, and they will share with us what collaboration means in practice when it comes to due diligence from their very perspective. And then a Q&A session with some closing remarks at the end. If we could move to the next slide, please, because we talk collaboration, I couldn't help it, but also say a couple of words about amfori's work, which actually is very much grounded on collaboration. This is how amfori BSCI started off in the early 2000s as a collaborative effort of a very small number at the time of retailers who were sourcing from the same suppliers, and realized actually that by working collaboratively, they could increase leverage and they could maximize resources, both for them but also for suppliers. Nowadays, amfori BSCI actually brings together more than 2,400 members, all around a set of commitments. The amfori BSCI system has not remained the same over the years. We have evolved because, of course, expectations do evolve, and the last update was done in 2021. But amfori BSCI also means working collaboratively, not just on social matters, but also on environmental matters, which is why we launched in 2014 the amfori BPI, and then revised it in 2023 to really work collaboratively across businesses and with their suppliers on improving conditions at the environmental level. And of course, collaboration also does very much make sense when it comes to working on grievances and remedies by bringing together companies and utilizing their combined leverage to address remedies, which is why we launched in 2022, actually rolled out at the time in Vietnam, the amfori Speak for Change program, which is our supply chain grievance mechanism, a complementary tool to the operational level grievance mechanism. In the interest of time, I will not dwell for longer on the collaboration at amfori, though I think I should have said that collaboration is not just within the amfori system, but also across systems. So we do collaborate a lot also with other partners to advance due diligence. But now handing over to Andrea Schill from the OECD, Responsible Business Conduct Center. We're extremely happy to have you, Andrea, with us, and over to you to tell us a little bit about what it is that the OECD has observed in terms of the role of initiatives in due diligence, how that has evolved over time, the kind of strengths, but also limitations, and maybe some recommendations that you might have. Over to you, Andrea.
Thanks so much, Valentina, and also for the invitation. At the OECD Center for Responsible Business Conduct, we work with sustainability initiatives for three main purposes. The first is really to promote reliable information on the variety of sustainability initiatives, as you have mentioned, Valentina, at the beginning. The second is to understand the role of initiatives in due diligence, and that's what we will be talking about today mainly. And another one is to improve the credibility and also the alignment with OECD due diligence standards, where it makes sense for the individual initiative. And some of you may have heard of our OECD alignment assessments. We can stick to the first slide for a moment. Some of you may have heard of the OECD alignment assessments. Others have heard of maybe our OECD due diligence checker for companies and initiatives that we have launched in the garment and footwear sector, but one will also be soon available in the agriculture sector. At the OECD, we differentiate initiatives between verification and facilitation initiatives. So when we speak about verification initiatives, that refers to initiatives that set and monitor requirements for due diligence or specific outcomes, like labor outcomes, for example. They can certify or benchmark entities or products. And then on the other hand, when we talk about facilitation initiatives, this is, refers to initiatives that provide information, tools, or guidance. They identify best practices, bring together companies to collaborate, pool knowledge. So all to inform due diligence more broadly. Of course, there are initiatives that fall into both of these categories, but I think it's helpful to always refer a bit of what kind of initiatives we are talking about. And you may agree that over the past decades, there was a proliferation of initiatives of all kinds, like shapes and forms. And diversity can be a strength in that regard, but it also created some confusion due to varying like ambition, activities, and scope. And I think it's important to note for us that the OECD well-designed and governed sustainability initiatives will continue to play a strong role. And it's also important that companies can use initiatives that they find relevant. When it comes to mandatory due diligence legislation, and I will just quickly touch on that because we have Michaela here for the second intervention on specifically that topic. But when it comes to mandatory due diligence legislation, it really highlighted debates on the role of initiatives as indicators of compliance. So ultimately, this is also about the role of initiatives in due diligence, and I will more focus on that topic. But laws differ in specifying the role of initiatives. Some adopted recognition of equivalence models like in the mineral sectors, others avoid that. And our main takeaway always, or main point when it comes to mandatory due diligence is about ensuring that businesses have the ultimate responsibility for identifying and addressing adverse impacts in their own operations, but also supply chains. And of course, sustainability initiatives can support across the 6 steps, depending what they are focusing on and on what tiers. And but they cannot act as a safe harbor in our perspective. In my second part of the intervention, I will now present our latest thinking around the role of certifications in company due diligence. But most of what I will be sharing is equally applicable, for example, to audits and all like the space of verification initiatives more broadly. We used examples in our recent publication that we just launched 2 weeks ago of the garment and footwear sector. But again, the considerations and like findings that we share there also apply across sectors broadly. So certifications independently attest specific outcomes, processes, product characteristics, or also management systems. In the paper, we distinguish between 3 types: due diligence certifications, so those that have already integrated expectations related to the 6 steps. Then targeted risk certifications, which are more, let's say, the classic like labor or environmental certifications that do not yet go into much detail when it comes to management systems, but rather attest certain outcomes like the presence of emergency exits or absence of child labor. And then a third category of certifications of chain of custody and origin, so those that trace products or attest the origin of commodities. And as due diligence certifications are still quite rare, we have focused our thinking in the paper more on the 2 last types and not so much on due diligence certifications yet. We conducted an OECD survey, and you see some results on the slide here. So 81% of brands and retailers indicated that they require sustainability certifications from their suppliers. And another, 78% indicated that they find certifications a useful tool for supporting due diligence. The most cited motivations for brands and retailers to require certifications from suppliers were, for example, risk identification, tracing products, and reputational reasons. We also asked, of course, about the challenges that are associated with certifications, and they might not be that surprising. The most relevant challenges that brands and retailers indicated were high administrative burden, high costs, and complexity to understand. We have the same numbers for suppliers also in the paper, so I invite you to also check out the paper after the webinar. I will now give some insights into our findings and reflections on 2 use cases and what companies should keep in mind when they use certifications in that way. And the 2 use cases I want to present is using certifications as a form of assurance and using them as a source of information. And with that, we can move to the next slide and start with certifications as a form of assurance. So what do companies want to assure actually? In our survey, and also if you go through sustainability reports, you see that one interest is assuring where the product travels through the supply chain, so knowing about the locations of manufacturing, for example, but also knowing where the raw materials come from. So the first really like tracing products through the supply chain and attest origin of commodity. And over 80% of brands and retailers confirmed that interest. Another interest, or what companies want to assure, is of course whether suppliers or materials are meeting a particular standard. And that ultimately can, for example, be used to select new suppliers or materials. And another one is identifying risk, but even after having identified certain risks or impacts, using certifications to assure in a way that the risk or impact that has been identified is prevented and mitigated. And 77% of brands and retailers confirmed that. So, but what are the considerations for companies that use certifications in that way? We have, in the paper, we present like 3 main considerations. The first is companies should consider that certifications provide a snapshot of outcomes at a specific point in time. That's maybe also not surprising if you have been in the space for a while. And when it comes to due diligence and using certifications there, companies need to consider how they can best build on the information they get from the certification or even the audit at a specific point in time, but not rely on the result like long term. Another point concerns the assessment methodologies of certifications that vary in the extent to which they allow for dynamic approaches. And if you look into our OECD due diligence standards, you see that tailoring the assessment methodologies is really important because it allows that you can detect the risks and impacts. And tailoring to the specific risk and local context is super important to get a full picture. And there might be varieties across certifications, and it's just something companies should be aware of and look into what the specific certification or audit is doing when it comes to assessment methodologies and also allowing tailoring of those. And last point regarding the certifications as a form of assurance and consideration, of course, concerns certifications assessment framework and governance as they impact the results. And this is the general discussion we have about credibility of verification initiatives and different forms and shapes. And our OECD alignment assessments have also highlighted some of important like discrepancies when it comes to quality of initiatives like assessments. And we have summarized them recently in a reflections report, and there's also a link to the report that you can check out the details. And in the end, if the certification is not credible, it's of course difficult to assure outcomes. Then the last point, certifications as a source of information. Brands and retailers use certifications in a variety of ways for information. 85% confirmed that. The issue or consideration we present in the paper concerns that certifications typically only pass on binary conformity information, so supplier certified or not certified. Audits in that way may differ because they come with an audit report, but also that quality may differ across audit schemes. And ultimately, that can lead to a lack of important contextual information for due diligence that's really necessary, like presence of vulnerable groups or what kind of other products are produced in the same factory that may impact the risk profile. But it can also lead to a lack of knowledge on initial non-compliances, because usually the factory is allowed to close them in advance and then get certified afterwards, which is great. But if I don't know what the initial non-compliances were, I cannot really consider if there should be additional due diligence activities that I should consider, conduct a root cause analysis, and assess whether corrective actions were substantive enough in the end. So it's really important to triangulate certification information with other information. And with that, I come to the end of my intervention, and just as a summary of key takeaways, valid across all sustainability initiatives, but in this sense more valid for maybe verification initiatives. So we can move to the last slide. Thanks. So one key takeaway that I started off with is to mitigate the risk of over-reliance on sustainability initiatives and at the expense of other tools for companies. Second is applying a risk-based approach. Also important maybe to note is that not all suppliers need to be audited or certified. It's really important to prioritize based on severity and likelihood, and then also consider if certification and audit is a good tool in that particular case or not. And then understanding and evaluating as a third point, the sustainability initiatives that the company intends to use, as I've shown, and ensuring that initiatives follow high credibility standards is essential. And then last point is that ensuring or incentivizing actually sustainability initiatives to share relevant and granular information as a last point. And with that, I close, and I'm happy to take further questions on that or the first bit. Thank you so much, Valentina.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you so much for this very comprehensive overview that speaks to the complexity of the landscape of initiatives, but also zooming in on the role of certification initiatives, and also speaking to what it is that companies and initiatives themselves can do. Thank you so much also for the recommendations. There are some questions coming in, but please, as a reminder, do not hesitate, actually, you following the webinar, to use the Q&A functionality to pose questions throughout the whole duration of the webinar. And now I'm very happy to invite Michaela Streibelt from the German Helpdesk on Business and Human Rights to come in to tell us really what it is that the EU Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive does say or not say about the role of initiatives when it comes to the core due diligence duty. And maybe before handing over to you, Misha, just a small comment regarding the omnibus, because of course, yesterday the European Commission published its first omnibus simplification package with a set of proposals to simplify, amongst others, also the EU Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. I think we took the decision not to speak to what was presented yesterday, because it is mostly a proposal at this stage that will need to go through the legislative process. As such, it could look different in a few months from now. Therefore, we're going to be talking about the CSDDD that was adopted and entered into force last year. But of course, if there are questions, we can also try and take some of those. So over to you, Misha.
Yeah, thanks very much, Valentina. And yeah, without further ado, I would like to jump to the next slide and share a couple of words in relation to the help desk. I was just surprised to see that we did 11 webinars already, so I will try to keep it brief because you've seen it many times, where German government offer to companies and business associations, and we provide consultation services in relation to business and human rights, as well as awareness raising. And on the next slide, you can see an overview over our activities. I believe these slides will be shared with you, so I invite you to have a look. The orange words actually are hyperlinks, so you can click on them and see what's behind it. It's all free of charge tools, same as our advisory services. This is free of charge as well. I believe that incredibly helpful in relation to supporting businesses' due diligence activities. So we do free of charge advice, but also provide for training programs, participate and organize our own events, and have a set of online services or online tools that you can check out. And yeah, coming to the actual topic of initiatives in the context of the CSDDD, without going into the role of initiatives, I would like to briefly outline the due diligence system, the risk management system of the CSDDD. We like to share this diagram a lot, this graphic, where you can really see how one due diligence obligations feeds into the next. And we put the stakeholder engagement into the center, because stakeholder engagement really is heart and center of due diligence. It's about rights holders and their interests. And obviously, this is not a circular process like that, because actually most of these obligations under the CSDDD are interrelated. But collaborating with others in either multi-stakeholder initiatives, which would include civil society organizations, could potentially also include governmental actors, or industry initiatives, so just among companies, could be very beneficial in relation to many different of these due diligence obligations. So they could be helpful in relation to the risk analysis, but companies could be collaborating with one another. It could be helpful also in relation to stakeholder engagement, in relation to doing preventive or corrective measures, and also in relation to the complaints and notification procedure. And as Andrea said earlier, the role of MSIs and initiatives is likely going to grow even further. It has already grown, as she said, in the last decade or so. And I believe that with or without the omnibus, or what it might actually entail in detail, the role of initiatives will probably increase, and some of the learnings from the CSDDD might continue to be relevant. And so on the next slide, please, I'm going to share with you what's in the, I'm going to share something else with you first, I apologize. So when companies are using initiatives, their action in the context of the initiative must feed into appropriate due diligence. If it needs to be a contribution to appropriate due diligence, the actions taken within the initiative must meet the threshold of appropriateness. And so in this context, it's important to understand what appropriateness actually means. For those of you who know the German Supply Chain Act, there's also an appropriateness criterion, which is a little quite similar, a little bit different. And the CSDDD's appropriateness criterion includes both effectiveness criteria and then similar criteria to the appropriateness criteria of the German Supply Chain Act. And so first of all, appropriateness means that the actions must be effective. So they must at least make it possible that the goal of the due diligence is reached. Then they must be commensurate to severity and likelihood of occurrence of the violation, then reasonably available to the company. Prioritization only happens according to severity and likelihood of occurrence. And then there's additional requirements in relation to the appropriateness of preventive and corrective measures. So here, the ability to influence and contributions are also considered, as well as the position of the actor responsible for the violation in the supply chain, which also obviously is interrelated with ability to influence and contributions. And so on the next slide, I'm going to show you what the CSDDD says in relation to initiatives, industry or multi-stakeholder initiatives. And the CSDDD actually does not contain any provisions in relation to the role of industry or multi-stakeholder initiatives, but in recital 52, it outlines what role initiatives can play, for what they could be used, but also what companies should be mindful about in relation to using initiatives. And in the same recital, there's a lot of language in relation to the role of audit, so role of third-party verification, which are also, as you heard earlier, really relevant in the context of initiative, if it's an initiative that, resolves around verification. And I think it's quite clear initiatives can support due diligence, and they can be an important role in increasing leverage. So when companies are collaborating with one another, they might be stronger together and strong enough, for example, to have enough leverage in relation to an actor that might otherwise be unimpressed when one of its buyers insists on meeting standards, for example, meeting certain standards, for example. In the context of increasing leverage, however, we need to be mindful of competition and antitrust law. So it's important to keep this in mind and look at not doing boycotts together, for example, not sharing competition relevant data, for example, pricing strategies, but to what extent competition law sets boundaries in relation to collaborating both on a horizontal and vertical level in initiatives differs from one European country to another. But both the vertical and horizontal guidelines from the European Commission in relation to not collaboration and sustainability initiatives, but in general, in relation to collaboration, have been updated recently, and a lot more is possible than what companies often think. So very often we hear, oh my God, there is competition and antitrust law, our hands are tied, there's nothing we can do. This is really not the case. A lot more is possible than what you think. And there's even in the last years been decisions by national competition authorities allowing certain schemes within initiatives to set, for example, minimum standards for prices that are intended at increasing or contributing to living wages and incomes. So even there, like something in relation to pricing strategy, which was considered not allowed before, is now possible. Generally participating in an initiative, as I said earlier, must be appropriate. So what a company does in relation to their due diligence obligation must meet the same threshold, whether they're acting within or without an initiative. And this means that a lot of the remarks Andrea had, or a lot of the advice Andrea was just sharing with you should be considered on an individual case-by-case basis. So since the CSDDD does not relieve companies from their due diligence obligations when they're acting within an initiative, but companies actually remain responsible for their own due diligence when they're acting in an initiative, they need to carefully assess what then it actually contributes to the specific due diligence obligation they would like to fulfill with it, and then assess also whether it's appropriate in the context of the CSDDD. So looking at the criteria that I just explained, so effectiveness, proportionate to severity and likelihood, and reasonably available, as well as in relation to measures, ability to influence, and contributions, as well as position in the supply chain. So one thing in which initiatives can be particularly helpful is the risk analysis that I've just mentioned. That in this context, initiatives can, for example, do an overarching risk analysis for the most relevant, the most salient risks in the industry, for example, or in a specific country or regional context, or for the most salient risks that are most relevant for the member companies in the initiative. And companies can then use this as a basis for their own risk analyses. And in order to facilitate companies, to assist companies in assessing how helpful a certain initiative could be, both the Commission and the Member States shall provide information in relation to initiatives, and the Commission is also tasked under the CSDDD to issue guidelines on fitness criteria and methods to assess initiatives. So I will leave it at that. Maybe later in the questions and answers round, we can have some time to discuss maybe some practice examples in relation to assistance that initiatives in practice have provided, or some best practice examples. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Misha, for this overview. Maybe just a question, if I may, because we also said that we would probably say something about the German Supply Chain Act. Is there anything that you could quickly maybe share? Probably there is not a specific provision as such in the German Supply Chain Act, but maybe something that has been done by BAFA in terms of guidance development in that space.
Yeah, sure. So similar to the CSDDD, the Supply Chain Act does not say anything in relation to initiatives. I believe, if I remember correctly, the memorandum from the German government with which they introduced the explanatory memorandum with which they introduced the law has some language in relation to the role of initiatives, but similarly, being part of an initiative does not relieve companies from their due diligence obligations. The BAFA has recently published guidance in relation to the role of standards, certifications, and initiatives. I mean, it doesn't really have an emphasis on focus on initiatives, but some elements mentioned in this context are relevant for initiatives as well. And I believe it's not yet available in English, but will probably be available soon on the website of the BAFA.
Thank you. And otherwise, we can use some of the AI translation tools for those who do not speak German. Thank you so much, Misha. Now, if we could move on to the next one, one more, please. We're gonna start with the reflections from practice, and I would like to invite first and foremost Carlos from the Responsible Labor Initiative, Vice President of Labor Affairs. The Responsible Labor Initiative is an initiative by the Responsible Business Alliance. I'm very happy to have you with us, Carlos, and I would just ask you to tell us a little bit about how it is that you support your members with forced labor due diligence, which is, I think, the focus of the Responsible Labor Initiative. Over to you, Carlos.
Thank you, Valentina, and thank you, amfori, for this timely webinar. And thank you to our two previous speakers, who I think really set the stage very well in terms of sort of what we're looking at into this evolution into a world of mandatory due diligence. But as Valentina mentioned, the Responsible Labor Initiative, which I help lead, is part of the Responsible Business Alliance. So maybe before I get into the RLI, I'll say a couple of words on the RBA. And really very similar to what Valentina said earlier, RBA has been an industry initiative since around 2004, grounded in the electronics industry, but since has expanded to cover a whole range of other industries, and really bringing, it's very similar to amfori, bringing 600 members and their supply chains together to really kind of collectively tackle these environmental and social issues. So when we looked at, or when we look at this sort of world of emerging mandatory due diligence, we've been asked by our leadership and asked by our members, you know, are we ready? Is this enough? And I think one of the good things that we've seen, and one of the things that I think kind of like brings us some confidence, is that, you know, much like the laws, the work of RBA and its initiatives has been based on international standards. And so we actually feel that we're starting from a very solid foundation for implementation. It doesn't mean that it's easy. It doesn't mean that it's going to be simple, but basically building on that ground and having that foothold that was just mentioned earlier in the CSDDD, allowing for the role of initiatives, not as a safe haven, but really as a place to collectively, efficiently address these issues. So I think, Valentina, you asked me, how do we help our members? We help them in three ways very much. We provide tools and practices and measures to help a member can take, whether they're audits or otherwise, to actually meet their due diligence obligations. Data, I think increasingly data interoperability and sharing of data is a critical element so that we can actually begin to understand not just what's happening in a factory today, but really can we kind of make that data interoperable so we'd actually have it preventable, so we could actually get ahead of this so we don't have to remediate an impact, we could actually address it. And then the collective aspects, so collective implementation, shared remediation. A lot of the work we do at RBA is bringing the members together and actually kind of like bringing that leverage and trying to address these issues. When I look at the topic of forced labor, I think forced labor is still probably one of the most complex and complicated issues that all companies have to address, all companies with complex supply chain, no matter what sectors. It has always been a critical component of the RBA, and that's why back in 2017, we launched the Responsible Labor Initiative, not only as a due diligence program, which it is basically to help meet forced labor due diligence, but also as a sort of extension. One of the things that we want to address, it's not, compliance with the laws are critical, but also how do we address some of the root causes that lead to these sort of human rights deficits and things like that. So RLI is multi-industry and multi-stakeholder. So the idea was this is not just affecting electronics or manufacturing or automotive industries. There's a lot of shared supply chains, shared recruitment corridors, shared elements. So how can we leverage the tools and come together and really make a dent into that? And I'll give a couple of examples because I think it's important to say, these are big ideas, but how do they actually happen in practice? And I think when I look at forced labor due diligence, quite apart from an audit, quite apart from a risk assessment, and certainly a remedy and grievance mechanisms, which are all important tools that we have, it's how do we kind of create markets for example, how do we create a market for ethical recruitment? I think one of the biggest challenges that we felt or that we've seen in terms of our member supply chains over the years is that it's quite difficult in many of the markets we operate where things such as recruitment fees are allowed to be charged by certain governments to workers that put workers in a debt bondage situation. So some of the things that we've been working on at RLI is, how do we come together with partners such as the International Organization for Migration and others to kind of create that demand and create that market for ethical recruitment. So over the last 6 years, we've been running a responsible recruitment program that has looked to create a maturity pathway for recruitment agencies and brokers who help source labor. And, we've had a lot of challenges. It's not, been perfect, but at least now we're beginning to understand and beginning to come together to really sense that, well, as these laws are beginning to demand, not only in Europe, or also you see some of them in the United States, but it's really in the countries where a lot of these things are happening. How do we create that market and how do we come together? So we're pleased to kind of continue to work on that and to be able to work with some of the partners and others on that to be able to really create that demand side, to create a critical and viable and ethical market, viable market for ethical recruitment. And I guess one last thought, and I know I don't really have much time, and love to kind of enter into debate. I think we are in a very sensitive moment. I think you've referred a few times to the omnibus. I think we're still trying to tackle that. We'll be having some events in Brussels over the coming months that we hope to unpack what's actually happening. But really, I think it's important to keep in mind is how do we make sure that how these laws are implemented, whether it's the CSDDD, the EU's forced labor ban, forced labor regulation, but also others as well, actually are not just our compliance exercise, that's very important, but are also making a positive and durable impact for people, especially when we're looking at it from a forced labor perspective. So I think that's something that we're certainly going to be very involved in. We're happy to partner with groups like amfori and continue the dialogues and others here and continue to try to understand how we can not just meet this challenge, but also pass this expectation. So with that, maybe Valentina, I'll pass it back to you and happy to engage in a discussion.
Thank you so much, Carlos, also for speaking to the challenges, right? Because of course, collaboration does make sense. It's about bringing the leverage. It's about creating a shared approach, but there are still challenges. And I guess getting to the root cause of some of the work that we do is a challenge in and of itself, but doing it collaboratively can definitely add some weight. I see that there are some questions coming through. Just a reminder that you are most welcome to put forward questions through the Q&A function, and we're going to try and answer those later during the webinar. Now, moving on to the next speaker, I'm very happy to welcome Christiane, who is also an amfori board member. She's head of sustainability, quality and compliance at Holy Fashion Group. And a very simple question for you, Christiane, if you could just tell us what it means, due diligence, right, for a company like Holy Fashion Group, what it means for you, and where collaboration and maybe partnership comes in supporting some of the things that you do at the level of due diligence.
Yeah, thank you first of all, Valentina and Amfori, for having me to give some insights about our pragmatic business practices. And I'm quite happy and confident because all the speakers ahead of me, if it is Andrea or also Michaela, they shared already more or less the theoretical approach of we pragmatically have inbounded into our operations yet. If you like to go to the other slide, I'm happy to show to the audience in a nutshell what we are currently doing. So first of all, we are as a Swiss organization running 3 premium fashion brands, Strelson, Windsor and Joop, which are most likely very familiar to the German or to the DACH region countries. But we are globally distributing our garments, I think per date, into 57 different countries. So we have to cope not only with the European and the Swiss legislation, but also, of course, with the countries we are selling our garments to. So I think the frameworks which we experience, on one hand, borne by the German government with the German Supply Chain Act, and on the other hand, with the European legislation in place, and also in the upcoming well-discussed CSDDD, CSRD as such. So we are very familiarized with everything. And for us, it is very important to put the stakeholders in the center of our attention. So we started very early, already in 2008, becoming a member of Amfori, because for us, it is really reasonable to have a good social understanding and a good business practice in place, at least fostered with Tier 1, but meanwhile also going beyond. We are currently having around 100 garment maker, which is classically the Tier 1 level. And we have direct business partners also in Tier 2, born by the circumstances that we are in the premium business. That means that we are selecting all the fabrics, accessories, trims by ourselves, and majorly also nominating them. So we have at least, I assume, 300 direct business partners. And with the sake and the support of Retraced as our business partner in supply chain monitoring, we have already identified more than 500 to 600 business partners in the value chain. This, of course, is still not sufficient and not enough, because I also saw in the chat the question for the identification of farm-level partners. This definitely is a challenge, but I think it's important to do the right things in the right order. And we are an SME, so we do what is possible in our financial proposition, and of course also in topics not only financial resources, but also in the headcounts and the human resources with the team. So we focus literally with our strategy, first of all, on evaluating our risk, and This is a per date risk analysis, which is approved also by the Green Button. We are for 3 consecutive years Green Button audited and certified company. So we qualify with our business ethics in accordance to the frameworks of the Green Button, which of course we can also link to the German Supply Chain Act, and which we may also link to the requirements from the CSDDD. So when I followed Michaela's circle, I could really tick by heart all the boxes that we can say we are prepared for what is coming, but of course there is still a lot to be done. So this is a journey. We have started this journey, and maybe we are ahead of the one or the other in the competition, but we definitely have still a lot to do. So how do we manage and maintain then the same? We started a few years ago with the certification to get more qualified fibers, more responsible sourcing practices into place, because we understood that if you have only a limited number of people taking care for this business angle, it's much easier to rely on a certification process as it's offered under the Sustainable Apparel Coalition and of course the GOTS standard, rather than having heaps of people around the globe to monitor the entire value chain. So this is helping to us. I addressed already that we are amfori member in 2008, and in terms of risk, we also understood that we do not differentiate between risk and non-risk countries. So for us, human rights are equal, regardless in which political system the people are working and living, because we produce in Europe as well as everywhere else. And therefore, we go with an audit in each and every country and company. Besides, of course, big part of due diligence is also the chemical management. And here we are really precise in our monitoring. And we have 100% export due diligence in place, and we are doing a random import due diligence in accordance with the legal obligations. We have started, as I addressed already, the supply chain tracking, and we are going deeper and deeper, and we very much appreciate here the collaboration opportunity, because we know our competition, we know who is also working with the same factories, and I think the audit fatigue is already stressed far enough in our industry, and it's on us as a brand and a retailer to understand how we can serve our partners in the more appropriate way. They should focus on doing their business rather than hanging a fire extinguisher from one place to another because another customer is coming and following a different audit scheme. So with the opportunity of corrective action plans, we have a really nice opportunity to collaborate with our competition so that we work together. We have built joint forces to improve the working conditions in the value chain. Last but not least, of course, we are a big fan of the Speak for Change program on one hand, but we also understand that there are certain limits, and it's also seen under a good business practice. And if you really want to conduct a responsible or more sustainable governance in your organization, that you have to leave business as usual behind. And that means that you need to take care also for the individual interest, specifically in terms of jeopardizing situation in terms of human rights. And that's why we established our own grievance mechanism. And in every factory, they have the possibility, of course, to hang a print on the blackboard for the workers. So far, we can say our grievance mechanism is function. So we receive grievances. Luckily, per date, we haven't received a serious human rights jeopardizing situation. We haven't faced this yet, which does not mean that this is an absence of such a situation. I'm pretty sure there are situations as such in the value chain, but they haven't brought to our attention yet. But anyway, the more we do, the better we engage with the stakeholders, the more we can, of course, highlight and also emphasis to bring this into discussion. And that's why we started last year together with Hohenstein our own stakeholder dialogue program, which we have rolled out to 4 risk countries meanwhile in local languages and dialects, so that we really reach the stakeholders. And it's dedicated only to factory workers. So really the blue collar workers. We have rolled out this program for countries. 18 factories per date have been trained with over 300 workers. And even though our factories are all ranking under the scope of amfori, I would say more than 75% of the factories are rated A and B. However, we think even though if we work with literally good factories, they have friends, they have families, they have people around in other factories where maybe the situation is not as compliant as those in which we are working. And that's why we do not limit ourselves and say, no, everything is good, which for sure is not. So please spread the good words. Please share with your communities, with your local communities. There is a possibility to use a grievance mechanism. There is a possibility to enhance your knowledge in terms of occupational health and safety and chemical management, and of course, much more. So I think I'm coming to the end of my time already, which is a pity because, you know, I take the momentum now and I would love to share more insights with you, but no worries. You can connect with myself via LinkedIn, and I'm happy to disclose more insights. If you're interested, please don't hesitate contacting me afterwards. I'm happy to answer your questions. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Christiana, for this very comprehensive overview. And of course, it was a challenge in and of itself to ask you to tell us all that you were doing in a limited amount of time. There are a couple of questions addressed at you, but I think we can try to answer them live because it could be also of interest to the others. And now I would like to move to Stephanie Raymond, Senior Manager at of International Partnerships at IDH. Equally happy to have you with us, Stephanie. And I would like you to kindly share with us the kind of work that you are facilitating, and this time looking at different supply chains and different commodities. So we're talking fresh fruits, vegetables, and we're talking commodities such as cocoa. So probably moving into a different space, but maybe similar challenges and similar collaborative approaches. So over to you, Stephanie, and yeah, look forward to your presentation.
Thanks a lot, Valentina, and thanks to the organizers for inviting IDH to share our experience on this key topic of due diligence and multi-stakeholder collaboration. You can go maybe to the next slide and the next one again. Thanks, perfect. So for those of you who don't know IDH, we're an international organization that was founded in 2008, bringing together public and private stakeholders with the aim to make global agricultural markets more sustainable and more inclusive. And together with our partners, we develop solutions to critical challenges in global value chains, such as climate change, unfair working conditions and wages, unequal value distribution, and gender inequality. And we work closely with the private sector. The light is switching off, right? We work closely with the private sector because we really believe that markets have the power to make trade more inclusive and more sustainable. Can go to the next slide. So multi-stakeholder collaboration is actually really key to what we do as an organization. And we really believe that, you know, legislation is indeed an important driver, but real progress is only possible when you bring together the private and the public sector to tackle root causes. And for the due diligence efforts in particular, we really strongly agree that the multi-stakeholder initiatives can and should support companies to comply and to implement their due diligence, allowing them to act more efficiently and effectively and to bring about more positive change for their value chains and actually for the sector overall. IDH has a lot of experience convening these type of sector and multi-stakeholder initiatives, which you can see through some of the numbers on the slide. And today, as Valentina mentioned, I wanted to share with 2 specific examples with you, one being the CFAV for the Sustainability Initiative for Fruit and Vegetables, and the second one, Beyond Chocolate, which is the Belgian chocolate convening multi-stakeholder platform as well. Can go to the next slide. Perfect. So just a few words about CFAV, actually. So this is a industry initiative or multi-stakeholder initiative bringing together 47 partners. You can see some of the logos there, spanning retail, trade, standard organizations, associations, and others. And the idea is to jointly develop credible tools and solutions and to really have collaborative action towards impact and really move the needle for the sector overall. If you go quickly to the next slide, just to talk a few words about the strategy, actually, where here you can see that for the 2025 strategy of CFAV, we have environmental and social programs, looking at common goals and aligned methods, collaborative action, but really the due diligence program is really the foundational building block of the whole strategy for 2025. And I wanted to talk you through a few examples of what this means in practice for CFAV and their members, actually. So if you can go to the next slide. So we also have a bit of a diagram showing the due diligence steps, and also very strongly agree, obviously, that stakeholder engagement is central to everything. So we didn't prepare that in advance with the other speaker, but I think it's a nice coincidence. So on sort of the strategy and implementation part, CFAV, for example, provides sector-specific due diligence guidance to the members and also knowledge-building webinars to help the partners and the members build due diligence into their strategy. Also quite heavily focused on identifying and assessing risks. So they've developed a sustainability risk assessment tool, and members are also asked to use that to conduct annual risk assessments to prioritize issues, products, regions to focus their action. And they've also done some interesting thinking around what the difference is between this sort of sector, more generic risk assessment and the risk assessment for a specific company, and how that overlaps, where the differences are, and how they can complement each other as well. And on the sort of, sorry, I can go back again. On the prevention and mitigation of adverse impacts, members are also asked to set ambitious targets covering those key areas, things like emissions, water use, and living wages. CFAV has also established what they call a basket of standards that help for harmonization, risk mitigation, and transparency among the members. Less focused, I would say, on the remediation and complaints procedure steps, but then again, coming back with the monitoring and communicating on the effectiveness of efforts, so members complete annual risk and progress reporting either individually or in an aggregated due diligence report. And CFAV really encourages better data collection and data-driven decision-making amongst their members as well. And of course, stakeholder engagement being central to it all in the nature of this multi-stakeholder collaboration. So that's a few words for CFAV. Now you can go to the next slide, actually, and I'll tell you a bit about what that looks like for the chocolate sector as well. So Beyond Chocolate is the Partnership for Sustainable Belgian Chocolate Industry with support from the Belgian Development Corporation. It was established also in 2018 and kicked off a really influential multi-stakeholder collaboration in Belgium. I should say that similar initiatives also exist in other countries. They have this term that they've coined, the ISCO. So there's the Dutch Sustainable Cocoa Initiative, the DISCO, the GISCO in Germany, and the Swissco in Switzerland. And in Belgium, they chose a different name, actually, but it's quite a similar initiative. And they have three main aims for targets, what they want to achieve, actually. So they're aiming to have 100% certified products for the Belgian market by 2025, zero deforestation for the Belgian chocolate sector, and a living income by 2030. So you can go to the next slide. So just a quick word also on the partners that are involved. So Beyond Chocolate brings together a wide range of stakeholders, actually, including small and large players in various stages of the chocolate value chain, also certification standards, impact investors, retailers, NGOs, knowledge institutes, trade unions, and the public sector as well. So a really multi-stakeholder collaboration. And on the next slide, similarly, just wanted to talk you through a few of the steps where due diligence plays a key role, actually. So again, on strategy and implementation, they're developing a unified set of principles on sustainable procurement practices, and this is also together with the other country initiatives on sustainable chocolate, and also providing guidance and resources for sector-specific due diligence. On the identifying and assessing risks, actually, it's also a key focus area for this initiative, where they're focused on really the upstream risks, including extreme poverty, living income, forced and child labor, and deforestation. And they're also developing tools and resources to measure the gaps and assess the prevalence of the risks for the members. on prevention and mitigation of adverse impacts. So all the commitments, the joint actions are really aimed at bringing adverse impacts to an end and preventing future impacts. So it's kind of core to what they do. And on the remediation, actually, members are also encouraged to implement joint projects that focus on remediating adverse impacts in their supply chain, like, for example, living income gaps. And then on the monitor and communicate on the effectiveness of efforts as well. So partner companies are required to report transparently on progress made towards these joint targets. And then the initiative actually aggregates the results and reports in a aggregated way on the effectiveness of the actions and the impact of Beyond Chocolate as well, which is really key, I think, to both initiatives, is monitoring and communicating externally on what's being done towards the targets that have been set. So just actually to summarize in a few points, I mean, I think in conclusion from our experience, not only with these two, but also with several other sector initiatives that we run, maybe you can go to the next slide. We think that, you know, multi-stakeholder initiatives really can play a key role in various stages of the due diligence process. And obviously need to be complemented by action by individual companies, but really can support. And in a few ways in particular, I would say on developing sector-specific tools and guidance. I remember being at an event previously and someone saying, you know, a t-shirt is not the same as a car. And this is very much true as well for, I think, agricultural supply chains, each having its own specific risks. So really looking at it from a sector-specific point of view is helpful. A lot of work done around common risk identification and support for prioritization, preventative and corrective action as well, also facilitating data collection, monitoring and reporting. And we also find that in these multi-stakeholder collaborations, we can really push the needle and go beyond compliance, actually, to go for a higher level of sustainability. We also find that working together avoids disengagement from high-risk regions, which is a really key risk, actually, for a lot of agricultural supply chains as well, and also encourages the strong stakeholder engagement throughout all stages of the process. So that was my last slide, actually. I'm really happy to also take questions, and we'll provide these slides to you. You have my contact information on the next one. So if anybody would like more information, feel free to reach out.
Thanks a lot, Stephanie, for also speaking to some of the positive elements that you see coming out of multi-stakeholder initiatives, in particular when it is about coming together, working collaboratively on specific sector risks. So that, I think, is a very good message. And now, last but surely not least, I would like to move on to the next speaker, and I would like to invite in Rabea Shrafik from Brands Fashion, a member of the German Partnership for Sustainable Textiles, but also a member of amfori. But today, Rabea will talk about really the role of collaboration, in particular when it comes to grievances, therefore working on remediation through the lens of the German Partnership for Sustainable Textiles. But before Rabea starts, I think Clara would like to say a few words about the work that is done at the level of the German PST. Over to you, Clara.
Yeah, thank you very much, Valentina. So yeah, my name is Clara Oberheu, and I work as a project manager for the Secretariat of the Partnership for Sustainable Textiles. Next slide, please. Yeah, and also next slide, please. Thank you. So I very briefly wanted to give you an overview of the Partnership for Sustainable Textiles, in short, the PST, before handing over then to one of our members. The PST was founded in 2014. So just last November, we celebrated our 10th anniversary, and currently we have about 123 members coming from a very diverse stakeholder group, including businesses, associations, standard organizations, unions, but also NGOs and the federal German government. And as you can read on the slide at our mission statement, all members, they unite to act collectively for a healthy environment and social justice in the textile industry. And as a PSD, of course, we also collaborate with international and European initiatives and organizations. So among them, for example, the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, the Fairwear Foundation, or amfori. And as you can also see on the slides, the PSD is working in 3 core elements. So the first one is implementing due diligence, and the second one is ensuring supply chain transparency. And while these first 2 core areas rather occur on an individual level, the collaboration mainly happen in the focus topics. And we as PSD, we identified 4 topics, 4 main topics where we see the main challenges for the textile industry, but we also see at the same time a great leverage and much potential for improvement. So you can see these areas on the slide. So the first one is living wages and purchasing practices, environmental protection, gender equality, and then also grievance mechanism and remedy. And what is a very special case within these focus topics is the so-called joint action. So this is when PSD members, when they join forces in a multi-stakeholder context to implement projects in producing countries, aiming to have different impacts on site. And this was just a very brief overview on the PSD. But I feel what is always much more interesting than hearing a project manager from the secretariat to talk about the PSD is definitely to hear from one of our members. Therefore I'm very happy that one member is with us today. It's Rabea Schafrik from Brands Fashion. She is head of sustainability, and she will share now some practical insights on collaboration within the PSD and also how it helps the company to fulfill its due diligence obligations. So over to you, Rabea.
Yes, thank you very much for inviting me. I would start with a very, very brief company introduction. If you can go to the next slide. Just for you to get an idea of the company. So Brands Fashion is located in North Germany, close to Hamburg, was founded in 2002. We have about 200 employees, and our main products are corporate workwear and merchandise items. We are a B2B company, so we supply to other companies. We ourselves are not affected by the due diligence laws. But we are a direct supplier to our customers who are affected. So we are part of their supply chains and by this still affected. We offer what we call a one-stop solution. So we cover everything from product development, procurement, quality control, sustainability, of course. I'm in charge of, together with my team, IT solutions and logistics, and of course, sales and customer management. And on the next slide, I give you some insights of our membership in the PSD. We have become a member in 2015, and the PSD has and had various formats of engagement. It started in the beginning with working groups, then evolving to expert groups, strategy groups, and partnership initiatives, as we just heard. And Brands Fashion has been engaged on various topics, for example, organic cotton and circularity, more on the product level, then wastewater and chemical management, for example, on the environmental level, and social standards and complaint mechanism on the social level. And what is important for me to say today, referring to Omnibus, is that this due diligence we're doing and the collaboration we're doing is not something new to us. So this is not something we're doing since the laws were coming up, but this is something which is taking place since many years. And I think this is also this also applies to other companies. If you can click once more, and once more, you see some kind of a timeline, and you see that we are also part of other memberships and initiatives, also amfori. We joined in 2010. We are also a Green Button certified company, which was also very helpful for us to do due diligence in a very systematic way, similar to what we just heard from the Holy Group. That was also very helpful, and it's kind of a combination for us, perfect fit of the partnership for Sustainable Textiles and the Green Button. So I was asked to give a very specific example on how collaboration works in the partnership within the initiatives. So on the next slide, so we are a member of the initiative on joint grievance mechanism. The aim of this initiative was to increase the use of grievance mechanism in textile supply chains. We were using the grievance mechanism of the Fair Wear Foundation at nominated Tier 1 suppliers. So how was done? If you click once more, we started with some onboarding sessions, of course, for the brands in the group, but also for the suppliers. We were with 5 brands in the group and 1 NGO. So we had the onboarding sessions in the beginning. Then to like formally implement the mechanism, we asked the suppliers to put the poster, as most of us know probably, to really implement it in the factory. And then we also had some trainings, I will talk about this later, in the factories for the workers to create to increase the awareness on the mechanism and also on workers' rights. If you click once more, I have kind of summarized the benefits and what we like, why are we part of this initiative and what are the benefits from it? First of all, we get some kind of framework and guideline, like the theory part on grievance mechanisms. Of course, we get the lessons learned and best practices from the other Fair Wear Foundation members who have used the mechanism for a long time already, so we could really learn from them and get their best practices. If you click once more. We also had the exchange within our group, within the initiative with the other brands, so we could really speak about the challenges all of us had, and of course there are challenges, and discuss, okay, how did you do this and how did you address that, etc. There was a regular reporting, which meant that we also had some kind of pressure that we had to present within the group our progress on the project. That was also helpful to get some push on the topic. And then last, if you click once more, we had the chance to cooperate with the Fair Wear Foundation, obviously, but also Femnet as the NGO in the initiative. We could also involve a local NGO through Femnet. For us, it was CVDEP in India who conducted the trainings, where you can see the picture. So that was also very, very helpful to get some connection to local stakeholders and involve them in the project. And now, of course, we can use the learnings from the project and cascade it into our other supply chains. And also, speaking of collaboration, what is important to mention, there is a collaboration protocol between the Fair Wear Foundation, the PST, and amfori to share complaints and address if they apply to the members of those initiatives. And a big advantage is that now the Fair Wear tool can be used by PST members outside of this initiative. And on the last slide, just to sum it up, our benefit of being a member in the PST in general, if you click once more, it was already mentioned, and this is also our main benefit. Like, we have exchange and knowledge from this cooperation. It's like a big pool of expertise and know-how we can use for our activities. I also mentioned bundling and leverage. The motto of the PST is no single actor can do it alone, and I think this is what it's about. And as it was mentioned already, we can connect with various stakeholders, other brands, NGOs, civil societies, standard organizations, everyone who is part of the initiative, which is a really, really good chance for us. Also mentioned, we can use a lot of what we learn in the PST for our own risk analysis and to shape and define meaningful actions. And just overall, it is a big tool, the PST, but also the green button, which is helping us on implementing all legislation, everything that comes under the EU Green Deal. Yeah, that's it from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rabea and Clara. So we are perfectly on time, and we now have the task of going through the questions. And I think, Clara, we were already pre-selecting some. So maybe let's just get started with some questions and trying to understand who is best placed actually to answer those. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And without losing more time, as we quite received, some questions, we dive immediately into the Q&A. And I would start with a generic question. It's not specifically to one of our speakers, but all the speakers can come in who would like to answer these questions. So one participant is asking on the view of the panelists on the role of industry initiatives, certification schemes in the context of the omnibus regulations. So yeah, this is a very actual question. And perhaps, Misha, you could start first, and then if the other panelists would also like to come in on this question, feel free.
I mean, at this stage, it's really difficult to predict anything. I haven't read the whole omnibus myself yet either. To my understanding, I would find it very unlikely if there was changes in relation to the role of initiatives. I would believe that a future legislative act will continue to emphasize the role of initiatives, and I would also be surprised if there was what's a so-called safe harbor, so a relief of due diligence obligations just by being member of an initiative. And I can imagine that the European Union legislators and Commission will continue to underline the relevance of capacity building within companies in relation to understanding what type of initiatives could be suitable for them.
Yeah, thank you so much, Misha. Christiane, you would also like to answer this question. Over to you.
Yes, thank you so much. So even though we don't know what at the end will be agreed in an omnibus legislative approach, because we are currently seeing a proposal, I think the only advantage out of this omnibus agreement is that we are granted a little bit more time. But we are talking here about responsible sourcing and purchasing practices, and to build a fundamental business in terms of human rights and environmental responsibility. And frankly speaking, if you're dedicated to sustainable governance, you do not even need this legislative approach to do the right things in the right order for your organization. However, we learn from the business practice that a regulatory, like a legislation, is definitely helpful to bring a momentum in a development, and which we see and what we can read also in the framework agreements in our partnership with our wholesale partners, who really push to ask their suppliers, especially if they are located outside Europe like us, to really comply with European legislation. So in a nutshell, if you are working in an organization which is simply looking for profit and is following a business as usual approach, good luck, because you are born to fail. You will not manage the future in an appropriate way. But if you have a certain understanding for responsible and sustainable governance, you will bring one thing after another, step by step, into order. And I think it is very promising that we are talking in the omnibus discussion, and I'm talking now not as a human rights advocate, I'm talking as an employer of a profit-making organization, an economical business player. It is very helpful that the legislation is limiting in the first step to the direct business. And we are here predominantly in the apparel industry represented, where we have only a few hundred suppliers. But let's talk about automotive. I think a typical German automotive company is ranging between 30 to 40 or 50,000 direct suppliers. To imagine to bring them under control is already a huge step ahead for the industry and for the people working in this industry around the globe. However, if we are talking to stakeholders and human rights ambitioners, everybody will say this is definitely not enough and we should do more. It's never too late to do more, but I think we need a starting point. And may I add this in the discussion, which I criticize personally very much on the green button, is that we are obliged to bring in the 2.0b version a living wage implementation into account, while we are not having our entire value chain into knowledge, while we have not secured that in tier 2, tier 3 and beyond, social compliance methodologies are in place. And to my understanding, it is much more important to bring a certain level into the entire value chain and grow then step by step in a way of a cascade system in an appropriate way, rather than picking tier 1 and saying, oh, tier 1, you should be on a living wage, while we do not even have a look in tier 2 or tier 3. And the vast majority of the organizations, regardless which industry we are represented here in this call with over 200 participants, we definitely need to understand, we as brand and retailers and organization, we have limited resources, and we are dedicated to make profit for the organizations. And if we can link this profit to a responsible governance approach, I think we do more than someone can expect. And that's very helpful, rather if it's the omnibus or if it's the original version of the CSDDD. The omnibus is simply buying us some time. The resulting is going to happen anyways. That's my personal opinion. I might be a little bit we say spitz in German, but yeah, I'm happy to hear what Stephanie is saying.
Yeah, thank you so much, Christiane. Then over to Stephanie. What's your opinion on initiatives and certifications in the context of the Omnibus regulation?
Yeah, thanks, Clara. Maybe just a very more like a kind of simple answer, but I think, in the context of the Omnibus was very much around the regulatory burden, and also this feeling that companies might have not understood really what due diligence means in this fear of over-compliance even, and sort of this heavy burden that it was bringing. This is what they thought. And I think that's a very key role actually for multi-stakeholder initiatives, is to continue to show that a good majority of the due diligence efforts can be done more efficiently in these multi-stakeholder pre-competitive collaborative programs, and that it can be done easier. Not all of it, obviously. There is still definitely a role for companies to take it into their specific supply chains, but I think just reinforcing that message that together things can be done easier, more effectively, and to avoid this kind of like over-compliance feeling that I think a lot of companies were scared of.
Thank you so much. There are quite a few questions to the Holy Fashion Group, to you, Christiane, and I would like to continue with you then. So next question would be, what were the main drivers for you to engage in that due diligence journey, since you as an SME are not out of the scope from the due diligence legislation?
It's very simple. I'm personally following the approach, either you do things right or you don't do it. And that's very much my driver. And I'm already 30 years in this industry, and I was in the lucky proposition that I have been working for companies who always were in a very responsible sourcing practice. To name a few, it's Chibo, it was the Otto Group. So from the beginning, I learned a lot about responsible sourcing practices and grew into this as a newcomer to the industry around 30 years or 25 years ago. And for me, that was normal, that you respect human rights, that you do the things in the right order, and that you try always to lift a little bit the bar to do even better. And so maybe that's one of the reasons why I have been employed and received this role over the years here to maintain the same. And I think it is very important that in our industry, where we are really harming a lot of people, you only need to open a newspaper and you see what, again, the apparel industry caused kind of trouble and is reliable for so many really bad things happening out there. And so it's our proposition that we want to do it as good as possible for our brands, to fulfill somehow a secret promise to the end consumer that we are not only having medium to high level price garments in fantastic fabrics and qualities, but that we also take care and responsibility behind. Yeah, so that is our driver. And yes, on the other hand, we have contracts with partners from the European Union who are in the reporting obligations, and we are their supplier. So if you want to buy our garments in a wholesale department store, we are their supplier, so we are obliged also to fulfill these requirements. So even though the law is not applicable for us as an organization for our own stores, but in the event when we are selling through wholesale concepts, we are automatically under the obligations. But I think it's better to have a business attitude to take care in a responsible way, rather than waiting to be pushed by someone to do the next step.
Yeah, thank you so much for this explanation. I would give one last question to you. Perhaps you can keep it a bit short in order to stay within the time that we also have time for other questions. So one participant is asking, what happens if a factory comes with an audit from another program? Is there an attempt to harmonize this to avoid endless audits?
First of all, we are happy if a business partner shows contribution to social compliance audit schemes, in which direction ever, and that the content is identifying a stable situation to have an opportunity to get in touch and start business with. As we are a small entity, we can handle best possibly at the moment the amfori audit scheme. But of course, we are appreciating also other schemes, and SSCP is very much on the discussion and very much for the liking from most likely everyone. However, we do not have the resources to handle 90 pages of report versus 10 slides. This is simply a question of capacities, and we appreciate in general everyone who is audited, and we don't want to foster audit fatigue. However, for us to steer our risk and to mitigate also our risk in risk countries, for us it's the best to work with amfori.
Thank you, Christiana. Next question is also a more general one, and I invite all the speakers who would like to answer this question. So one participant is asking, where do these initiatives find qualified people in order to conduct this due diligence? Between audits, certifications, and HRDD, these does not seem to be enough experienced people across Europe to handle this volume of work. Misha, I see you raised your hands. Over to you.
I mean, I think what's important to note in this context is that companies must integrate due diligence in all relevant business activities, and they cannot do this by externalizing these activities, but they need to, at least to a certain degree, integrate this, and they must also integrate this to be effective into not only just one sustainability department, but this department must be working together with procurement, with HR, with the finance department, and depending on what the company is doing, maybe also a couple of other departments, and will need backing from top management. And when companies are collaborating in initiatives, this also means they're not like externalizing all of these activities, but this means that the initiative is actually a forum in which companies can come together. Okay, it really depends a little bit on the initiative as well, but my understanding is that it should be somewhere where companies come together, and the work of the initiative is also done by the member companies, basically. And so obviously for initiatives, there's lots of different criteria that are relevant to look at effectiveness and success of initiatives. And one of them is obviously that they have some sort of a continuous organizational structure. And for this, it might be helpful to have, you know, some like secretariat, for example, from the initiative, and a little bit of own staff of the initiative. But it doesn't mean that all of the activities by the initiative is done by people hired by the initiative. And so this will be people in companies who will be doing these things. And now you might ask, okay, how are companies going to find all of these like sustainability expertise individuals that they can hire? I mean, the important thing is we need people in all of these different departments that are already there and that are already doing the usual businesses that they're doing every day, to be knowledgeable also in relation to sustainability due diligence, because only then will companies be able to integrate this. So this is not about like hiring a lot of new people, but more about like internal capacity building, in my understanding.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Misha. Carlos, what is your point of view on this question?
Just wanted to add, I mean, at first I agree with what Misha said. Just wanted to add, I think the question said in Europe, I would actually say it's not just Europe. Actually, most of the impacts and what we need is going to be outside of Europe, Asia or other markets as well. I think the question of auditor fatigue or audit fatigue, but also auditor capacity is a huge one. I know we struggle with it. I think having and working together is one option as much as possible. I think looking at things and going beyond the audit, how can, we're thinking a lot about how can we have engage due diligence at an early point at the level of a facility so that we actually, not just certification, but actually begin to understand and have people within the facility who understand, for example, the RBA code of conduct, how to implement that, how to avoid that. So the audit is only happening once every few years. I mean, the audit is one piece. So I think the laws will hopefully, on one hand, create a demand for, more auditors and create more opportunities. We certainly work with folks like APSCA on that, because I see there's another question about them. But I think it's also how do we kind of limit that as much as possible, and how can we work together? So I think it's going to be a very complicated journey, but I think we got to kind of like part of this is the collaboration, which will be very important.
Thank you so much. In order to remain in the time, I would suggest that I only pick one last question now. And of course, in the meantime, the speakers try to answer the outstanding questions in writing. So last question of today would be also a generic one, not specific to one speaker. So what area of due diligence can multi-stakeholder initiatives not address effectively? What obligations and responsibilities still sit with the companies? Any volunteers who would like to answer this question? Misha.
I mean, I think this touches upon the question that we just discussed. So it's about companies also having to address these issues internally and not being able to externalize things. But there's a couple of practice examples, like I think I've given this really briefly outlined. An organization could do an overarching risk analysis and then give this as a basis for companies' own risk analyses. And there's a great example from the German Coffee Association that have done risk analysis for the most important coffee sourcing countries of the members. But this doesn't obviously replace the individual risk analysis of the companies, but is an important resource for them to be doing that.
Yeah, thank you so much. Andrea, I saw that you also raised your hands, but unfortunately we are running out of time, and I would like to conclude this session for today. So next slide, please. So first of all, thank you very much for these engaging questions and also for your active participation in the Q&A. I think this great number of participants, but also of questions, underscores definitely the interest in this topic. And I trust that you found today's session informative, but also helpful. And I think once again, today's meeting reaffirmed that collaboration is indeed fundamental. It is indeed a cornerstone to effective due diligence. And a very big thanks to our esteemed speakers, to Andrea, to Michaela, to Carlos, to Rabea, to Stephanie, and also to Christiane. Your expertise and also your experiences, your insights have been of great value for us today. And thank you very much for sharing them. And of course, also a special appreciation to Valentina and her team for ensuring the smooth operation of this webinar. You can see on the slide now the QR code for scanning and for giving your feedback to us. Your input will help us to tailor future webinars to better meet our needs. And we are always eager to learn and to improve, so please participate. Last slide, please. A very last information is, it was mentioned at the very beginning that this webinar is a series on due diligence, laws and practice, and we already have our next webinar around the corner. On the 3rd of April, we will unpack with you the topic of bridging sustainability, due diligence and reporting, the key to an effective implementation. And do follow us, please, and do register for the webinar if you are interested. And with that, I would like to conclude today's session. Have a wonderful day, and we look forward to seeing you very soon. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.